morning sun cast long shadows across the parade grounds of the Imperial Terran Command Center. Sergeant Marcus Webb stood at attention, his boots polished to a mirror shine, his uniform crisp and perfect. He had served in the Royal Guard for 15 years, ever since humanity had joined the Galactic Federation. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned, and his dedication absolute. Queen Camilla swept onto the parade grounds with an entourage of advisors and guards. She wore flowing robes of deep purple, embroidered with golden thread that caught the light with every movement. Her crown, a delicate piece of alien craftsmanship given as a gift from the Zarathian Empire, glittered atop her head. She had ruled Earth for 10 years now, ever since the monarchy had been restored as part of the Federation's cultural preservation program. The Queen moved down the line of assembled guards, her eyes scanning each face with barely concealed disdain. She had never liked the military traditions that humanity clung to. In her mind, they were primitive and unnecessary in this new age of galactic cooperation. She preferred the subtle bow of the Zorathians or the gentle hand gesture of the Plovians. The rigid military salute struck her as aggressive and outdated. Marcus watched her approach from the corner of his eye, maintaining his position. He could feel the tension in the air. The other guards had heard the rumors. The Queen wanted to change the traditional salute, to replace it with something she deemed more civilized. But no official order had come down through the chain of command. Colonel Harrison, their commanding officer, had said nothing about any changes. The Queen stopped directly in front of Marcus. Her eyes narrowed as she studied his face. He was older than most of the other guards, with gray streaking through his dark hair and lines etched around his eyes from years of service. She saw him as a relic, a symbol of everything she wanted to leave behind. "Sergeant Webb," she said, her voice carrying across the silent grounds. "I understand you are one of the senior members of the Royal Guard." "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, his voice steady and strong. "Then you should be setting an example for the younger guards," she continued. "I have decided that the traditional military salute is too harsh for our modern era. From this moment forward, all members of the Royal Guard will greet me with a Zorathian bow. It is more elegant, more refined, more fitting for a civilized society." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Around him, he could sense the other guards shifting uncomfortably. The Zorathian bow required bending at the waist with hands crossed over the chest. It was a gesture of submission, used by servants and subordinates in Zorathian culture, for soldiers, for warriors. It was deeply inappropriate. "Demonstrate for your fellow guards, Sergeant," the Queen commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Show them the proper way to greet their monarch." The parade grounds fell into absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. The Queen's advisors watched with smug satisfaction, already anticipating his compliance. The other guards watched with a mixture of hope and dread. Marcus had spent 15 years following orders. He had fought in 3 different conflicts, had shed blood for humanity on distant worlds. He had sworn an oath to protect Earth and its people, but he had also sworn an oath to uphold the dignity and traditions of the Royal Guard. Those traditions had been passed down through generations, from the old militaries of Earth before humanity had reached the stars. The salute was more than just a gesture. It represented honor, respect, and the equality between those who served and those they protected. It was a recognition that even a monarch stood as a citizen among citizens, protected by those who chose to serve. The Zorathian bow represented something different entirely. It represented subjugation. Marcus made his decision in that instant. He brought his right hand up sharply, fingers extended and joined, thumb tucked against his palm. His hand touched his forehead in the traditional military salute, held it for precisely 2 seconds, then snapped back down to his side. The movement was crisp, perfect, and utterly defiant. "Sergeant Webb," the Queen's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "I gave you a direct command." "I heard Your Majesty's request," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "But I cannot comply." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. The Queen's face flushed red with anger and humiliation. Her advisors stepped forward, hands reaching for communication devices. This was unprecedented. No one defied the Queen, especially not in public, especially not in front of the entire royal guard. "You cannot," the Queen repeated, her voice rising. "You dare to tell your Queen what you cannot do?" "The chain of command is clear, Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the storm he knew he was unleashing. "Changes to military protocol must come through the proper channels. Colonel Harrison is my commanding officer. Until I receive orders from him, I will continue to follow established regulations." The Queen's eyes blazed with fury. She turned to her chief advisor, Lord Pemberton, a thin man with calculating eyes. "Have this man arrested immediately. Charge him with insubordination, disrespect to the crown, and whatever else you can think of. I want him removed from the guard and imprisoned." Lord Pemberton stepped forward, his lips curled in a satisfied smile. He had been looking for ways to break the independence of the military for years. This was the perfect opportunity. "Guards, take Sergeant Webb into custody." Two of the Queen's personal security team moved forward, but they found their path blocked. The other members of the Royal Guard had shifted positions, forming a wall between Marcus and the security team. They said nothing, did nothing overtly threatening, but their message was clear. They stood with their sergeant. The Queen's face went from red to purple. "How dare you? All of you will be arrested. This is mutiny." Colonel Harrison chose that moment to arrive, striding across the parade grounds with purpose. He was a tall man with silver hair and a chest full of medals earned in service to humanity. He stopped in front of the Queen and delivered a perfect salute, holding it until she was forced to acknowledge it. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice formal and professional. "I apologize for any confusion. There seems to have been a misunderstanding about proper protocol for changes to military regulations." The Queen spun on Colonel Harrison, her robes whipping around her ankles. Her fury found a new target and she advanced on him with barely controlled rage. Lord Pemberton stood behind her, his thin lips curved into what might have been anticipation or concern. The assembled guards remained frozen in their protective formation around Marcus, their faces carefully neutral, but their bodies tense. "Misunderstanding?" The Queen's voice carried across the parade grounds like a whip crack. "Your sergeant just defied a direct command from his monarch. That is not a misunderstanding, Colonel. That is treason." Colonel Harrison's expression remained calm, almost serene. He had anticipated this confrontation for weeks now, ever since whispers of the Queen's intentions had reached his ears through various channels. He had prepared accordingly, consulting with military legal advisors and reviewing every regulation in the Terran Military Code. "With respect, Your Majesty," Harrison began, his tone diplomatic but firm, "military protocols exist outside the direct purview of the Crown. This separation was established when Earth joined the Galactic Federation. The military answers to civilian authority on matters of policy and deployment, but internal regulations and traditions fall under the jurisdiction of the Defense Council." The Queen's eyes narrowed dangerously. She took a step closer to Harrison, close enough that her advisors shifted uncomfortably. "Are you telling me that I, as Queen of Earth and representative to the Galactic Federation, do not have authority over my own guards?" "The Royal Guard serves the Crown," Harrison acknowledged with a slight nod. "But they remain members of the Terran Defense Force. Any changes to their operational procedures, including ceremonial protocols, must be approved through proper channels. Those channels include review by the Defense Council, the Joint Chiefs, and ultimately the Parliament." Lord Pemberton saw his opportunity and seized it. He stepped forward, his voice smooth and practiced. "Colonel Harrison, surely you're not suggesting that Her Majesty needs permission from bureaucrats to determine how her own guards should greet her? That would be absurd. The Queen is the living embodiment of Earth's sovereignty." Harrison turned his gaze to Pemberton, and there was something cold in his eyes that made the advisor falter slightly. "I'm suggesting, Lord Pemberton, that we live under a system of laws and regulations. Those laws exist to protect everyone, including Her Majesty. If we allow those protections to be bypassed for convenience, we undermine the very foundation of our society." The Queen's face had gone from angry red to a pale, tight mask. She was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially not in public. For 10 years, she had grown used to advisors who bent to her will, to politicians who feared her influence, to a public that treated her with reverence. The military had always been the one institution that maintained its distance, that followed its own codes and traditions. She had tolerated it, but lately, she had decided that tolerance was weakness. "You speak of foundations and laws," she said, her voice dropping to something quieter but no less dangerous. "Yet your sergeant stands there in open defiance. If you truly respected the law, Colonel, you would have him arrested immediately for insubordination." Harrison shook his head slowly. "Sergeant Webb did not commit insubordination, Your Majesty. He followed the regulations as they currently stand. No official order has been issued changing the salute protocol. Until such an order exists, he is required to follow existing procedures. To do otherwise would actually be a violation of his oath." This explanation seemed to enrage the Queen further. Her hands clenched at her sides, and for a moment it looked as though she might strike Harrison. The guards tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. The situation was spiraling toward a crisis that could shake the foundations of Earth's government. "Fine," the Queen said, biting off each word. "Then I will go through your precious channels. I will speak to the Defense Council, to the Joint Chiefs, to Parliament itself if necessary. But mark my words, Colonel Harrison, this insolence will not stand. Your sergeant and anyone who supports him will face consequences." She turned to leave, but Harrison's next words stopped her in her tracks. "There's something else Your Majesty should know," he said carefully. "The Galactic Federation has been watching this situation with interest." The Queen froze, then slowly turned back to face him. "What are you talking about?" Harrison gestured toward the sky, where somewhere beyond the blue atmosphere the massive Federation station orbited Earth. "Ambassador Krell of the Zorathian Empire contacted me this morning. He wanted to clarify something about the Zorathian bow that Your Majesty is so eager to adopt." Lord Pemberton's face went pale. He had been the one to suggest the Zorathian bow to the Queen, presenting it as a more civilized alternative to the harsh military salute. He had studied Zorathian culture extensively during his time as a diplomatic attaché, but apparently he had not studied it well enough. Ambassador Krell explained that the bow Your Majesty described is specifically used by servants addressing their masters. Harrison continued, his voice steady. "It would be deeply insulting to require trained soldiers to use such a gesture. In Zorathian culture, warriors greet their leaders with a different gesture entirely, one that actually bears a striking resemblance to our traditional salute." The Queen's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, understanding, and finally a deep, burning humiliation. She turned slowly to look at Lord Pemberton, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Is this true?" she asked quietly. Pemberton stammered, his carefully cultivated composure crumbling. "Aye, that is, the research I conducted suggested that the bow was appropriate for formal occasions. The nuances of warrior protocols in Zorathian culture are quite complex, and I may have overlooked certain contextual elements. In other words, he had made a catastrophic error. He had convinced the Queen to demand that her military guards greet her with a gesture used by slaves and servants. If she had succeeded in implementing this change, it would have been broadcast across the Galactic Federation. Earth's military would have become a laughingstock, and the Queen herself would have been seen as ignorant of basic cultural protocols. The guards on the parade ground remained silent, but Marcus allowed himself the smallest hint of satisfaction. He had not known about Ambassador Krell's message, but he had known instinctively that something was wrong with the proposed change. Years of military service had given him a sense for when civilians misunderstood warrior cultures. The Queen stood absolutely still for a long moment. Around her, her advisors shifted nervously, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The Royal Guard waited, their formation around Marcus unwavering. Colonel Harrison simply watched, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Finally, the Queen spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Colonel Harrison, inform Ambassador Krell that Earth appreciates his clarification. Sergeant Webb, you are dismissed. Return to your duties." Without another word, she turned and strode off the parade grounds, her robes billowing behind her. Her entourage scrambled to follow, Lord Pemberton trailing behind with his head down. The crisis had been averted, but everyone present knew that something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between the Crown and the military. The news spread through the Imperial Terran Command Center like wildfire. Within hours, every soldier on base knew what had happened on the parade grounds. By evening, the story had reached military installations across Earth and on distant colonies. By the next morning, it was being discussed in Parliament, analyzed by news outlets, and debated in homes across the planet. Marcus sat in his quarters that night, staring at the wall. He had not expected to become famous or infamous depending on who was telling the story. His communication device had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends, family, former comrades, and even complete strangers. Some praised him as a hero standing up for military tradition. Others condemned him as an arrogant soldier who had disrespected the Queen. He had turned the device off hours ago, needing silence to process what had happened. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Colonel Harrison standing in the hallway, looking tired but satisfied. "May I come in, Sergeant?" Harrison asked. "Of course, sir." Marcus stepped aside, allowing the colonel to enter. Harrison settled into a chair with a heavy sigh. For a moment, the military formality between them relaxed slightly. They were two soldiers who had just weathered a storm together. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've seen in 30 years of service," Harrison said finally. "I haven't decided which yet." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Honestly, sir, neither have I." "You know the Queen is furious. She may have backed down today, but she's not the type to forgive easily. Your career could be over, Webb. Even if they don't court-martial you, you'll be watching your back for years." "I know, sir, but I couldn't do it. That bow, it felt wrong. We're soldiers, not servants." Harrison nodded slowly. "Ambassador Krell's message was fortuitous. I received it this morning, just before the parade. If it had come even a day later, things might have turned out very differently." "Do you think the ambassador knew what was happening?" Marcus asked. "I'm certain of it. The Zorathians have excellent intelligence networks. Krell probably heard about the Queen's plans before most of our own people did. He was doing us a favor, preventing an embarrassment that would have damaged Earth's standing in the Federation." Marcus considered this. The Galactic Federation was a complex web of alliances, traditions, and cultural protocols. Humanity was still relatively new to this galactic stage, having joined only 20 years ago. Every misstep was noticed, every cultural mistake magnified. The Queen's error would have been particularly damaging because it involved military protocol, something that carried weight across virtually every species in the Federation. "What happens now, sir?" Marcus asked. Harrison rubbed his face tiredly. "Now we deal with the political fallout. The Defense Council is meeting tomorrow. Parliament will likely call for hearings, and the Queen will be working with her advisors to figure out how to save face without admitting she was wrong." "And Lord Pemberton?" "That's the interesting part," Harrison said, leaning forward. "I've been hearing whispers that he's in serious trouble. The Queen doesn't tolerate advisors who make her look foolish. There are rumors she's already begun looking for his replacement." Marcus felt a twinge of sympathy for Pemberton. Despite everything, the man had made a mistake, but it had come from ignorance rather than malice. Still, in the cutthroat world of royal politics, ignorance was often treated as a greater crime than malice. "There's something else you should know," Harrison continued. "You've become something of a symbol, Webb. People are calling you the soldier who stood up to the Queen. Some of the younger guards are already calling this the parade ground stand." Marcus grimaced. "That's the last thing I wanted, sir. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just following regulations, I know. But that's what makes it powerful. You weren't grandstanding or seeking attention. You simply refused to compromise on principle. That resonates with people, especially in the military. We've all felt the pressure to compromise, to bend the rules for convenience or political expediency. Seeing someone refuse to do that even when facing the Queen herself, it means something." There was another knock at the door. This time, when Marcus opened it, he found Lieutenant Sarah Chen standing in the hallway. She was one of the younger guards who had stood in formation with him that morning. "Sorry to interrupt, Sir Sergeant," she said, looking between them nervously, "but there's a situation developing that you need to know about." Harrison stood immediately. "What kind of situation?" "The Queen's security team has been asking questions about the guards who stood with Sergeant Webb today. They're compiling a list of names. Word is spreading that anyone on that list might face disciplinary action." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was exactly what he had feared. His stand had been his own choice, but others had supported him without being asked. Now they might pay the price for his defiance. How many names are on the list? Harrison asked sharply. Almost the entire Royal Guard detachment, sir. 43 names. They're calling it conspiracy to commit mutiny. Harrison's face went hard. That's ridiculous. Those guards didn't mutiny. They simply didn't assist in arresting a fellow soldier who had committed no crime. I know, sir, but the Queen's legal team is arguing that their refusal to act constituted support for insubordination. Marcus spoke up, his voice urgent. Colonel, I need to make a statement. This wasn't a conspiracy. Those guards didn't know what I was going to do. They shouldn't be punished for my actions. Harrison held up a hand. Calm down, Webb. We're not going to let them twist this into something it wasn't. Lieutenant Chen, thank you for the warning. I want you to gather all the guards whose names are on that list. Have them meet me in the main briefing room in 1 hour. Tell them this is not optional. Yes, sir. Chen saluted and hurried away. Harrison turned back to Marcus. This is escalating faster than I expected. The Queen is trying to turn this into a test of loyalty, to force the entire guard to choose between their traditions and their positions. Then maybe we need to force her hand. Marcus said quietly. Make her commit to this course of action publicly, where everyone can see it. What are you suggesting? A formal inquiry. Request one through official channels. Make everything public and transparent. If she's going to charge 43 loyal soldiers with mutiny, let her do it in front of Parliament, the Defense Council, and the entire Galactic Federation. Harrison studied him for a long moment. That's a dangerous game, Webb. If we go public and lose, all of you will face severe consequences. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even prison. But if we don't fight this now, it sets a precedent. The next time someone questions an order, the next time someone stands on principle, they'll remember what happened to us. The military will become just another political tool, and that's more dangerous than anything the Queen could do to us personally. Harrison was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing the risks. Then he nodded slowly. All right. I'll request a formal inquiry, but Webb, you need to understand something. Once we start this, there's no going back. The Queen will see it as a direct challenge to her authority. Win or lose, the military's relationship with the Crown will never be the same. I understand, sir, but some things are worth fighting for. Harrison stood and moved toward the door, then paused. You know, when I woke up this morning, I thought today would be routine. Just another parade, just another ceremony. It's funny how quickly everything can change. After Harrison left, Marcus sat alone in his quarters again. Through the window, he could see the lights of the command center, thousands of personnel going about their duties. Beyond that, the lights of the city stretched to the horizon. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, the Galactic Federation station orbited silently, watching humanity navigate its latest crisis. Marcus had spent 15 years preparing to face external threats, enemies from other worlds, dangers from the depths of space. He had never imagined that his greatest battle would be fought not against aliens or invaders, but against his own queen, on the parade grounds of his home base, over something as simple as a salute. The parliamentary hearing room was packed with spectators, journalists, and officials from across Earth's government. News cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting the proceedings to billions of viewers across human space and beyond. Representatives from the Galactic Federation sat in an observation gallery, their varied forms and features a reminder that this small human dispute was being watched by countless alien civilizations. Marcus sat at a long table with the 43 other guards, whose names had appeared on the Queen's list. They wore their dress uniforms, every button polished, every crease perfect. Colonel Harrison sat at the head of their table, flanked by military legal advisors. Across the room, the Queen's legal team occupied another table, led by a sharp-featured woman named Victoria Cross, who was known as the Crown's most ruthless prosecutor. The Queen herself sat in a special gallery reserved for the monarch, elevated above the common floor. She wore black robes today, as if in mourning for the respect she felt had been denied her. Lord Pemberton was notably absent. Rumors suggested he had been quietly dismissed and sent to a diplomatic posting on one of Earth's most remote colonies. The Speaker of Parliament, an elderly man named Thomas Wright, called the session to order. His voice carried across the sudden silence with practiced authority. This formal inquiry has been convened to examine the events that occurred on the parade grounds of the Imperial Terran Command Center 3 days ago. The Crown has accused Sergeant Marcus Webb and 43 members of the Royal Guard of conspiracy to commit mutiny. Colonel Harrison has requested this public inquiry to address these charges transparently. Victoria Cross rose smoothly from her seat. She was a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes swept across the assembled guards with cold calculation. "Members of Parliament, honored observers, Your Majesty," she began, nodding toward the Queen. "The facts of this case are simple and undeniable. Queen Camilla, the rightful monarch of Earth and our representative to the Galactic Federation, gave Sergeant Webb a direct command. He refused to obey. When her security team attempted to arrest him for this insubordination, 43 other guards blocked their path. This is the very definition of mutiny." She pulled up a holographic display showing footage from the parade grounds. The image was damning. It clearly showed Marcus delivering his salute instead of the requested bow, then the other guards shifting to form a protective barrier around him. "The defense will argue about regulations and protocols," Cross continued. "They will try to cloud the issue with technicalities. But at its core, this case is about one simple question. Does the Queen of Earth have authority over her own guards? If the answer is no, then we have no monarchy. If the answer is yes, then these soldiers are guilty of mutiny." She sat down, looking satisfied. It was a strong opening, and Marcus could feel the tension in the room shift. Several members of Parliament were nodding thoughtfully. The Crown's case seemed straightforward and compelling. Colonel Harrison rose to respond. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving the room time to settle before he spoke. "Madame Cross presents a compelling narrative," he began. "But like many compelling narratives, it omits crucial details. She asks whether the Queen has authority over her guards. I ask a different question. Does anyone, even a monarch, have the authority to order soldiers to violate their oaths and regulations?" He activated his own holographic display. This one showed military regulations, highlighted sections glowing softly in the air. "The Terran military code is clear. Changes to military protocols must follow established procedures. These procedures exist for a reason. They prevent arbitrary changes that might compromise military effectiveness or undermine unit cohesion." Sergeant Webb did not refuse a lawful order. He declined to follow an unauthorized request that contradicted existing regulations. Cross was on her feet immediately. "Are you suggesting that the Queen's commands are mere requests? That soldiers can pick and choose which orders to follow, based on their personal interpretation of regulations?" "I'm suggesting that regulations exist to protect everyone, including the Queen herself," Harrison replied calmly. "Consider what would have happened if Sergeant Webb had obeyed. He would have taught every guard present that regulations can be ignored when someone with sufficient authority asks them to. What happens the next time someone claims authority and orders them to bypass security protocols, to ignore safety procedures, to compromise their duties?" He pulled up another display, this one showing communication logs. "Furthermore, Ambassador Krell of the Zorathian Empire had contacted me that very morning to clarify the cultural meaning of the bow the Queen requested. It was a gesture used by servants and slaves, not warriors. If our guards had adopted it, Earth would have been humiliated in front of the entire Galactic Federation." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Queen's face remained impassive, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair tightly. One of the Parliament members, a middle-aged woman named Rachel Morrison, raised her hand for recognition. Speaker Wright acknowledged her. "Colonel Harrison, I understand your point about regulations, but what about the other 43 guards? Even if we accept that Sergeant Webb was technically correct, what justification did the others have for blocking the security team?" Harrison had been expecting this question. Representative Morrison, those guards were faced with an impossible situation. They saw their sergeant being arrested for following regulations. They knew the arrest was unjustified. To assist in that arrest would have made them complicit in an injustice. They did not attack the security team. They did not threaten anyone. They simply stood their ground and waited for their commanding officer to arrive and resolve the situation. "That's a convenient interpretation," Cross interjected. "But the law doesn't give soldiers the right to decide which arrests are justified. They were ordered to stand aside, and they refused. That's mutiny, plain and simple." Marcus had been sitting quietly, but now he felt compelled to speak. He stood, and the room fell silent. This was the first time the central figure in the case had addressed the Parliament directly. "May I speak, sir?" he asked, looking at Speaker Wright. Wright hesitated, then nodded. The floor recognizes Sergeant Webb. Marcus took a deep breath. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but now that the moment had arrived, the prepared words felt inadequate. He decided to speak from the heart instead. I've served in the Royal Guard for 15 years. I've stood watch in storms and heat. I've protected the crown through 3 different conflicts. I've bled for Earth on distant worlds. In all that time, I never once questioned an order, never once put my personal preferences above my duty. He paused, looking around the room. But duty isn't blind obedience. It's understanding why we serve and what we're protecting. The military salute isn't just a gesture. It represents the relationship between those who serve and those they protect. It says that we stand as equals in service to something greater than ourselves. He turned to look directly at the Queen. Your Majesty, I meant you no disrespect. But I couldn't compromise on this. Not because I'm stubborn or arrogant, but because the moment soldiers start ignoring regulations for convenience, we stop being a professional military. We become just another political tool, and that serves no one, least of all the people we're sworn to protect. The Queen met his gaze, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the entire chamber held its breath. Then Ambassador Krell rose from the observation gallery. The Zorathian was an impressive figure. Tall and insectoid with iridescent carapace armor that reflected the chamber's lights in rainbow patterns. His voice, when he spoke, was translated by a universal device into perfect English. I request permission to address this assembly, Krell said, his mandibles clicking softly. Speaker Wright looked surprised but nodded. The floor recognizes Ambassador Krell of the Zorathian Empire. Krell descended from the gallery, his movements fluid despite his alien form. He stopped in the center of the chamber where everyone could see him clearly. I have observed this proceeding with great interest, Krell began. In the Zorathian Empire, we have a saying, the strength of a warrior is measured not by how well they follow orders, but by how well they understand when orders are wrong. He turned to face the Queen. Your Majesty, with deepest respect, your advisor misunderstood our culture. The bow you requested would have been deeply insulting to your military forces. Sergeant Webb, in refusing this order, showed the kind of cultural awareness and integrity that my people deeply admire. He did not defy you out of arrogance. He protected Earth's honor, and by extension your own. The impact of Krell's words was immediate and profound. The Queen's face had gone pale. Several Parliament members were nodding vigorously. Even Victoria Cross seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Krell continued, the Galactic Federation is watching how humanity handles this situation. We are asking ourselves whether humans understand the balance between authority and wisdom, between tradition and adaptation. So far, I believe Sergeant Webb has provided a positive answer to that question. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted dramatically after Ambassador Krell's statement. The Zorathian returned to his seat in the observation gallery, leaving behind a wake of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. Victoria Cross remained standing, but her usual confidence seemed diminished. She conferred quietly with her legal team, their heads bent together in urgent discussion. Speaker Wright called for order, and the chamber gradually quieted. He looked between the Crown's prosecution table and the defense, clearly weighing how to proceed. This inquiry had taken an unexpected turn, and even his decades of parliamentary experience left him uncertain about the next steps. Ambassador Krell's testimony has introduced significant context to these proceedings, Wright said carefully. However, we must still address the legal questions at hand. Madam Cross, do you wish to continue your case? Cross stood, her spine rigid. She was a professional, and professionals didn't quit just because the winds had shifted against them. I do, Mr. Speaker. While we appreciate Ambassador Krell's cultural insights, they don't address the fundamental issue. Sergeant Webb disobeyed what he believed to be a direct command from his Queen. The guards interfered with a lawful arrest. These actions cannot be overlooked simply because the command itself was culturally ill-advised. She activated another holographic display, this one showing military law precedents. Throughout history, militaries have functioned on a clear hierarchy of command. Soldiers do not get to debate the wisdom of orders. They follow them or they face consequences. If we excuse Sergeant Webb's behavior, we create a dangerous precedent. Every soldier who disagrees with an order could claim they were protecting military honor or following some higher principle. It was a solid argument, and Marcus felt the tide beginning to turn again. Cross was right about one thing. Military discipline depended on clear lines of authority. If soldiers could simply refuse orders they disagreed with, chaos would follow. But Colonel Harrison was ready with a response. He stood and approached the center of the chamber, his movements measured and deliberate. "Madam Cross raises an important point about military discipline," Harrison said, "but she mischaracterizes what happened on those parade grounds. This wasn't a soldier disagreeing with tactics or strategy. This was a situation where a directive contradicted established regulations and cultural protocols that are fundamental to military identity." He pulled up the Terran military code again, zooming in on specific sections. "Our regulations specifically address situations where orders conflict with established procedures. In such cases, soldiers are required to seek clarification from their chain of command." That's exactly what Sergeant Webb did. He maintained his position according to regulations while I, his commanding officer, arrived to resolve the situation. Representative Morrison spoke up again. "But Colonel, he didn't ask for clarification. He simply refused. There's a difference." "Is there?" Harrison asked. In the heat of the moment, with the Queen demanding immediate compliance, Sergeant Webb made a split-second decision. He chose to maintain the established protocol rather than adopt an unauthorized one. That's not defiance. That's discipline. Another Parliament member, a young man named David Chen, raised his hand. "I'd like to hear from some of the other guards who were present. We've heard from the principals in this case, but what about the rank-and-file soldiers who stood with Sergeant Webb?" Speaker Wright nodded. "The inquiry recognizes that request. Would any of the guards like to address Parliament?" There was a moment of hesitation. Then Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood. She had been the one to warn Marcus and Harrison about the Queen's investigation. Now she was stepping forward to defend her actions publicly. "I'll speak, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the attention of the entire chamber focused on her. "Please proceed." "Lieutenant," Wright said. Sarah moved to stand beside Marcus, facing the assembly. She was young, only 26, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly why she was there. "I've been in the Royal Guard for 3 years," she began. "In that time, I've learned that being a soldier isn't just about following orders. It's about understanding the purpose behind those orders and maintaining the integrity of our service." She gestured to the other guards at the table. "When I saw what was happening on the parade grounds, I had to make a choice. I could assist in arresting a fellow soldier who had done nothing wrong, or I could stand my ground and wait for proper authority to resolve the situation. I chose to stand my ground, not because I was defying the Queen, but because I was upholding the principles I swore to protect." Victoria Cross interjected sharply. "You're very eloquent, Lieutenant, but you're describing exactly what the Crown is charging you with. You chose to disobey an order because you decided it was wrong. That's the definition of insubordination." Sarah turned to face Cross directly. "With respect, ma'am, I didn't disobey an order. I was never ordered to do anything. The Queen's security team asked us to move aside so they could arrest Sergeant Webb. They asked. They didn't command, and in that moment of uncertainty, we chose to wait for our commanding officer to clarify the situation. It was a subtle but important distinction, and several Parliament members leaned forward with interest." Cross's face tightened with frustration. "Semantics," she said dismissively. "The intent was clear." "Intent matters less than protocol in military situations," Harrison interjected. "The security team could have issued a formal command through proper channels. They chose not to, probably because they weren't certain of their authority. The guards responded to that uncertainty by maintaining their positions until proper authority arrived." The debate continued for another hour, with various Parliament members asking questions and both sides presenting arguments. The legal complexities of the case became increasingly apparent. This wasn't a simple matter of disobedience versus obedience. It was a question about how military regulations intersected with royal authority, about cultural awareness in a galactic community, and about the nature of honor and duty. Finally, Speaker Wright called for a recess. "This inquiry has raised significant questions that require careful consideration. We will reconvene tomorrow morning to hear final arguments and deliberate on our findings." As the chamber emptied, Marcus found himself surrounded by the other guards. They said nothing, but their presence was supportive and solid. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Ambassador Krell approached their group, his insectoid features difficult to read but his body language suggesting approval. Sergeant Webb, I wanted to speak with you privately, if I may. Marcus glanced at Colonel Harrison, who nodded permission. He followed Krell to a quiet corner of the now mostly empty chamber. You have put yourself in a difficult position, Krell said, his translated voice carrying a tone of concern. The Queen will not forgive this easily, regardless of how Parliament rules. I know, Marcus replied, but some things are worth the cost. Indeed. I wanted you to know that the Zarathian Empire respects what you did. We have been watching humanity's integration into the Federation with interest. Your species is young in galactic terms, still finding its place among older civilizations. How you handle challenges like this tells us much about your character as a people. And what does this situation tell you? Marcus asked. Krell's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. It tells me that humans value integrity even when it costs them personally. That you understand honor is not about blind obedience, but about principled action. These are qualities that will serve your species well in the centuries to come. The Zarathian paused, then continued in a lower tone. I should also tell you something that may prove useful. The Queen's position is not as secure as it appears. There are factions in your parliament who believe the monarchy has become too disconnected from the values that made Earth strong. Your stand on the parade grounds has given those factions a rallying point. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. I didn't do this to start a political movement. Of course not. But actions have consequences beyond our intentions. The question now is not whether your actions will have political ramifications, but how you will navigate those ramifications when they come. Krell touched Marcus's shoulder with one of his delicate manipulator limbs, a gesture of respect in Zarathian culture. Be prepared, Sergeant. The inquiry tomorrow may resolve the legal questions, but the larger implications of what you did are only beginning to unfold. As Krell walked away, Marcus stood alone in the empty chamber. Through the tall windows, he could see the city lights spreading to the horizon, and beyond that the stars where countless alien civilizations watched and judged humanity's choices. He had thought his defiance on the parade grounds would be a simple matter of principle. Now he was beginning to understand that nothing was simple when it came to politics, honor, and the complex web of galactic relationships that governed this new age of human history. The night before the inquiry resumed, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his quarters at the military residence near Parliament, staring at the ceiling and running through every possible outcome. His communication device had been buzzing constantly with messages from across human space. Some supported him, calling him a hero who stood up for military values. Others condemned him as an arrogant soldier who had disrespected the Queen. The divide seemed to mirror deeper tensions in Earth society about the role of monarchy, military independence, and humanity's place in the Galactic Federation. Around midnight, there was a soft knock at his door. Marcus opened it to find an unexpected visitor, Elizabeth Hartley, the Queen's private secretary. She was an older woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence. Marcus had met her briefly at various royal functions over the years. Ms. Hartley, he said, surprised. This is unexpected. May I come in, Sergeant? I won't take much of your time. Marcus stepped aside and she entered, glancing around the spare military quarters with interest. She settled into the room's only chair while Marcus remained standing, uncertain about the protocol for meeting privately with someone from the Queen's inner circle. I'm here unofficially, Hartley began. Her Majesty doesn't know about this visit, and it's probably best it stays that way. But I felt you deserved to understand something about the situation you found yourself in. I'm listening, Marcus said carefully. Hartley sighed, looking suddenly tired. The Queen is a complicated woman, Sergeant. She came to power at a difficult time, when humanity was still adjusting to Federation membership. She's worked hard to build Earth's reputation among the galactic powers, but in doing so she's become somewhat isolated from her own people and the institutions that support her rule. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow Parliament will likely rule in your favor. The legal case is weak, and Ambassador Krell's testimony made it clear that you actually prevented a significant diplomatic embarrassment. But that doesn't mean your troubles are over. Marcus nodded slowly. The Queen will hold a grudge. More than that, she'll see your vindication as a personal humiliation, and there are people around her who will encourage that view, who will push her toward retaliation. Not legal retaliation, nothing so obvious, but your career will be quietly sabotaged. Your assignments will become increasingly unpleasant, and eventually, you'll be forced to resign. That's a risk I accepted when I made my choice on the parade grounds, Marcus said. I know, but what you may not realize is that your situation has become a symbol for a much larger conflict. There are factions in Parliament who have been looking for an opportunity to limit royal authority. Others want to strengthen the monarchy. Your case has become the battleground for these competing visions of Earth's government. Hartley leaned forward, her voice becoming more urgent. Representative Morrison plans to introduce legislation tomorrow, immediately after the inquiry concludes. It will formalize the separation between military regulations and royal authority. It will codify exactly what you argued on those parade grounds. That the military serves the crown but operates according to its own professional standards. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. That will infuriate the Queen, yes, but it will also protect you and the other guards. And more importantly, it will establish a precedent that prevents future conflicts like this one. The question is whether you're prepared to become the public face of this movement. I'm a soldier, Ms. Hartley. I'm not a politician. Sometimes soldiers become symbols, whether they want to or not. You can try to avoid that role, but I don't think you'll succeed. The moment you delivered that salute instead of the bow, you became more than just a sergeant following regulations. You became a representation of military independence and honor. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Sergeant. The Queen isn't a villain in this story. She's a woman who made a mistake based on bad advice, and now she's trapped by her own pride. If there's any way to resolve this without humiliating her further, it would be better for everyone, including you. After Hartley left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts. He had joined the military to serve and protect, not to become embroiled in political battles. But Hartley was right. The situation had moved beyond his personal choice and had become something larger. Something with implications for how Earth's government would function for years to come. The next morning, the parliamentary chamber was even more crowded than before. News of Representative Morrison's planned legislation had leaked, and everyone wanted to witness what might be a pivotal moment in Earth's constitutional history. The guards took their seats. Marcus noted that several high-ranking military officers had joined them in the gallery. General Patricia Zhao, the head of the Terran Defense Force, sat in the front row, her presence a clear statement of support. Speaker Wright called the session to order, and the chamber fell silent. We will now hear closing arguments before the inquiry panel deliberates. Madame Cross, please proceed. Victoria Cross rose, and Marcus could see the strain in her face. This case had not gone as she had planned, and she was a lawyer who was used to winning. Members of Parliament, she began, I have spent my career defending the institutions that make our society function. The monarchy is one of those institutions. It represents continuity, tradition, and our identity as a people. If we rule today that soldiers can ignore royal commands whenever they believe those commands are unwise, we undermine the very foundation of constitutional monarchy. She paused, letting her words sink in. Yes, Sergeant Webb may have been culturally correct. Yes, Ambassador Krell testified that the requested gesture was inappropriate. But these facts don't change the fundamental issue. The Queen gave an order. That order was disobeyed. If we excuse this behavior, we set a dangerous precedent that will echo through the years to come. Cross sat down, and Colonel Harrison stood to deliver his closing argument. He approached the center of the chamber with the calm confidence of a man who knew he held the stronger position. Madame Cross speaks of precedent and tradition, Harrison began. I agree these are important, but let's be clear about what precedent we would set if we convict these soldiers. We would be saying that professional expertise and established regulations can be overridden by any authority figure who happens to outrank the person asking questions. We would be saying that cultural awareness and diplomatic sensitivity matter less than blind obedience. He gestured to the guards sitting quietly at their table. These men and women are professionals. They have trained for years to understand military protocols, cultural nuances, and the complex web of relationships that govern our interactions with the Galactic Federation. When they saw an order that contradicted everything they had learned, they didn't mutiny. They didn't attack anyone. They simply maintained their positions and waited for proper authority to clarify the situation. Harrison pulled up one final holographic display, showing the faces of the 43 guards. Each of these individuals has served Earth with distinction. They have risked their lives in defense of our planet and our values. They deserve better than to be sacrificed on the altar of political convenience. I ask this Parliament to recognize that doing the right thing is sometimes more important than doing the easy thing. As Harrison sat down, Speaker Wright nodded to the inquiry panel. 5 senior Parliament members who had been appointed to review the evidence and make a recommendation. They conferred briefly. Then the panel chair, an elderly woman named Margaret Foster, stood to deliver their findings. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimony presented, Foster began, her voice clear and strong. This panel finds that Sergeant Marcus Webb and the 43 members of the Royal Guard accused alongside him did not commit mutiny or insubordination. Their actions were consistent with established military regulations and professional standards. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Queen sat motionless in her gallery, her face an expressionless mask. Foster continued, "We further find that the situation on the parade grounds resulted from a lack of clear communication and established protocols for interaction between royal authority and military procedures. We recommend that Parliament address this gap in our constitutional framework to prevent similar conflicts in the future." It was a complete vindication, but Foster's recommendation made it clear that the battle was far from over. The legal question had been resolved, but the political question remained open. Before anyone else could speak, Representative Morrison stood. "Mr. Speaker, in light of these findings, I move to introduce emergency legislation to clarify the relationship between royal authority and military autonomy. The Military Independence Act would establish clear boundaries and procedures for situations where royal directives intersect with military operations." The chamber erupted in voices, some supporting Morrison's motion, others opposing it. The Queen finally showed emotion, her face flushing with anger. This was exactly what Elizabeth Hartley had warned about. Marcus's vindication was about to trigger a constitutional crisis. The chamber descended into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, some demanding immediate consideration of Morrison's legislation, others calling it an overreach that would weaken the monarchy. Speaker Wright banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. The Queen stood abruptly in her gallery, preparing to leave, but Ambassador Krell rose from his seat at the same moment. "Mr. Speaker," Krell's translated voice cut through the noise with unexpected authority, "if I may address this assembly once more." The chamber gradually quieted. Wright looked between Krell and the Queen, clearly weighing the diplomatic implications of allowing or denying the request. Finally he nodded. "The floor recognizes Ambassador Krell." The Zarathian descended to the chamber floor again, his iridescent carapace catching the light. When he spoke, his tone carried the weight of centuries of galactic diplomatic experience. "I have watched this proceeding with great interest, and I must confess concern. Your Parliament has made a wise ruling regarding the guards, but I sense you are about to make a grave error if you proceed with this legislation in the current climate of anger and division." He turned slowly, his multifaceted eyes seeming to take in everyone present. "The Galactic Federation has observed countless civilizations navigate the transition from planetary to interstellar society. This transition always creates tensions between tradition and adaptation, between established authority and emerging needs. How you resolve these tensions will determine your success in the larger galactic community." Morrison stood, his voice defensive. "With respect, Ambassador, this is an internal matter for Earth to resolve. The Military Independence Act is necessary to prevent future conflicts." "Is it?" Krell asked. "Or is it a reaction born from wounded pride and political opportunism? I do not question the need for clarity in your constitutional framework. I question the wisdom of establishing that clarity in the immediate aftermath of a conflict that has left both sides feeling aggrieved." The Queen spoke from her gallery, her voice cold. "What would you have us do, Ambassador? Pretend this situation never happened? Allow the military to claim authority over matters that should rightfully belong to the Crown?" Krell's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "I would have you learn from the Zarathian Empire's history. 300 years ago, we faced a similar crisis. Our warrior caste refused orders from the civilian government that they believed would dishonor their traditions. The government responded by passing laws that stripped the warriors of their independence. The result was a civil conflict that lasted 50 years and cost millions of lives." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Krell continued, We eventually found peace not through legislation forced through in anger, but through dialogue and mutual understanding. We established councils where warriors and civilians could discuss potential conflicts before they became crises. We created frameworks for cultural preservation while maintaining necessary authority structures. Most importantly, we learned that honor and authority need not be in opposition. Marcus felt something shift in the atmosphere. Krell was offering a path forward that didn't require either side to lose face, that didn't turn this moment into a permanent divide between the monarchy and the military. General Zhao stood from her seat in the gallery. "Mr. Speaker, permission to address the assembly." Wright nodded. Perhaps sensing that something important was about to happen, Zhao descended to stand near Krell. She was a compact woman with iron gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent 40 years in military service. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of her position as the highest-ranking military officer on Earth. "Ambassador Krell's words carry wisdom that we should heed," she began. "The military has no desire for conflict with the Crown. We serve Earth and its people, and that service includes loyalty to our constitutional monarch. But we also have a duty to maintain professional standards that have been developed over centuries of military tradition." She turned to face the Queen directly. "Your Majesty, Sergeant Webb and his fellow guards did not act out of disrespect for you personally or for the Crown as an institution. They acted to preserve the integrity of the military traditions that make them effective protectors. In doing so, they actually served your interests, preventing a cultural mistake that would have damaged Earth's reputation across the Federation." The Queen's expression remained hard, but Marcus thought he detected a slight softening around her eyes. Zhao pressed on. "I propose that we step back from this precipice. Rather than rushing through legislation in the heat of emotion, let us form a joint commission. Representatives from the military, the Crown, Parliament, and the Galactic Federation can work together to establish clear protocols for situations where royal authority intersects with military operations. This commission can take its time, consider all perspectives, and create guidelines that serve everyone's interests." Representative Morrison looked torn. His legislation was popular with a significant faction of Parliament, and pushing it through now would score political points. But Zhao's proposal offered a way to achieve the same goals without creating a permanent rift. Before Morrison could respond, the Queen spoke again. This time her voice had lost some of its ice. "General Zhao, your proposal has merit, but it does not address the fact that my authority was publicly challenged. Some acknowledgement of that challenge must be made." Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the chamber turn toward him. This was the moment. He could remain silent, let others negotiate the resolution and hope for the best. Or he could step forward and try to bridge the divide himself. He stood and Colonel Harrison looked at him with concern. This wasn't planned, but Marcus knew what he needed to do. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "May I speak?" The Queen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Marcus walked to the center of the chamber, standing between the military representatives and the Queen's gallery. He had faced enemy fire on distant battlefields, had stood guard through storms and hardships, but nothing had prepared him for this moment of pure political tension. "Your Majesty, I owe you an apology," he began, and he could feel the surprise ripple through the room, not for following military regulations or for maintaining professional standards. "I don't apologize for those things because they were right and necessary, but I apologize for the manner in which this situation unfolded." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I could have requested a private audience. I could have asked Colonel Harrison to address your concerns through proper channels before the parade. Instead, my actions on those parade grounds created a public confrontation that forced you into a difficult position. That was not my intent, but it was the result, and for that I am sorry." The Queen leaned forward slightly, listening intently. "The military salute," Marcus continued, "is not a gesture of defiance. It's a gesture of respect, given by warriors to those they protect. When I saluted you that morning, I was acknowledging your position as our Queen and our representative to the Galactic Federation. I was also maintaining a tradition that connects every soldier who has ever served humanity, from the ancient armies of Earth to the guards who now stand watch over our colonies among the stars." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of Parliament members, military officers, and the watching Federation observers. We stand at a crossroads. We can let this moment divide us permanently, creating lasting enmity between institutions that need to work together. Or we can use this as an opportunity to build something better, to create understanding where there was confusion, to establish respect where there was conflict. Marcus turned back to the Queen. Your Majesty, I ask not for forgiveness but for understanding. The military serves the crown, and we do so with honor and dedication. But we also serve principles that transcend any individual, including ourselves. Finding the balance between those loyalties is the challenge we all face. The chamber remained silent as Marcus finished speaking. He had said what needed to be said, laid bare the complexity of the situation without making excuses or shifting blame. Now it was up to others to determine what came next. The Queen stood slowly in her gallery. For a moment Marcus thought she might simply leave, rejecting his words and his apology. But instead she spoke, her voice measured and thoughtful. Sergeant Webb, I accept your apology for the manner in which this situation unfolded. You are correct that a private discussion would have been more appropriate, but I must also acknowledge that the error was not entirely yours. I was advised poorly, and I reacted to that poor advice without proper consideration of the implications. She paused, and Marcus could see the effort it took for her to make these admissions publicly. I propose that we accept General Zhao's recommendation. Let us form a joint commission to establish clear protocols for future interactions between the Crown and the military, and let us use this unfortunate incident as a foundation for better understanding, rather than as a source of permanent division. Representative Morrison stood again, and Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes. The political moment for his legislation was slipping away, but Morrison was astute enough to recognize when to retreat.